Get ready, because what you're about to hear now may be too strong for those with a weak heart. 3 scary stories, rooted in the backlands of the Northeast. 3 tales that mix blood, legend, and prophecy. If you think you've seen it,
I'll think again. Because now you're going to dive into the darkest side of the deep Brazil. The first story will chill you to the bone. Lampião's horned cangaceiro.
A man named Zé Baiano, a feared cangaceiro, a faithful follower of Lampião. But no one imagined that behind that sharp dagger beat a heart blinded by passion. Lídia, the woman who ignited his desire and at the same time, his fury. What begins with love ends in tragedy. Jealousy, betrayal, and a revenge that left blood marks wherever he went. And this story, my friend, is real. The second story crosses the limits of logic. Imagine Lampião, the king of banditry feared by colonels and soldiers, now face to face with a creature that does not belong to the world of the living. Lampião versus werewolf. Yes, you heard right. A creature that walked through the woods of the Caatinga, howling in the early hours of the morning, spreading fear and death. Not even Lampião, with all his bravery, dared to cross paths with it in the dark. A legendary confrontation that few survived to tell the tale. And finally, the prophecy of old Zina, a mysterious woman with sunken eyes and heavy words. She warned danger was coming. But no one wanted to listen. They laughed at her, mocked her, and ignored every word. Until what she said began to come true, point by point. A punishment fell upon that forgotten village. People disappeared, screams in the night, and an end so cruel that to this day no one dares repeat her name out loud. If you like real stories, backlands, legends, and mysteries that chill you to the core, then leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. Because here in each story, fear has an accent and comes from the heart of the backlands. In the arid heart of the northeastern backlands between Mandacaru and Hidden Trails, the legend of Zé Baiano was born, one of the most feared bandits of Lampião's gang, known for his cold brutality and the cruel mark he left on his enemies. With a red-hot iron stamped with the initials JB, Zé was the terror of soldiers and civilians alike. But behind his dark gaze there was a lonely man, hardened by life, who never expected to be vulnerable to love. His routine was made up of ambushes, marches under the scorching sun, and bloody conflicts, until the day he met Lídia. A beautiful woman, with a magnetic presence and sharp words, Lídia broke down the bandits' emotional walls. With her, Zé stopped being a beast and became a man. For the first time, he felt something stronger than bloodlust, the desire to care, to love. But the backlands do not forgive weakness. The woman who tamed the beast began to grow bored with the cage. The fire that had lit in Zé began to fade in Lídia's eyes. She began to flirt with Bemtevi, a vain, blonde, and charming bandit who knew how to use charm as a weapon. Zé Baiano's heart, accustomed to steel and lead, began to silently crumble. The betrayal was confirmed when Coqueiro, a minor bandit, caught the couple in secret. He tried to use the information to take advantage of Lídia, but was humiliated in front of everyone. Wounded in his pride, Coqueiro betrayed the betrayal to the group, exposing Lídia and Bemtevi. Even so, Lídia turned the tables, accusing Coqueiro of attempted abuse. The result was her execution by order of Lampião. Zé, in silence, now bore not only the pain of betrayal, but the weight of public humiliation. From that moment on, Zé Baiano lost himself within himself. He spent the night mulling over every word, every gesture, every look exchanged between Lídia and Bemtv. When the sun came up, he was no longer the same. In a fit of blind hatred, he beat and killed Lídia with his own hands. He buried her under a umbu tree, where he had previously taken her to rest from the hardships of life in the bandits. That crime marked the beginning of a new phase in his life. More solitary, more cruel, more sick. He took out his pain on every woman who reminded him of Lídia, branding them with the same iron he used on his enemies. His companions began to fear him, and Lampião, realizing Zé's imbalance, removed him from the main missions. Now Zé wandered, on solitary missions like a wandering spirit, haunted by his memories and the voices from the past that echoed in his mind. It was during one of these wanderings that Zé Baiano made the mistake that would seal his fate. When he passed by the house of the Cuiteiro Antonio de Chiquinho, he tried to abuse the man's daughter, without success. Antonio's wife intervened and Zé backed down, but the mark of the threat remained. Antonio, a man of honor, decided that he would not let this go unpunished. He began to forge an alliance with soldiers and rivals from the Cangaço, planning revenge with patience and strategy. Zé, increasingly isolated, did not realize that the noose was closing in. His sanity went downhill. He no longer knew who to trust. He saw ghosts in the woods and talked to himself by the campfires. Death approached with silent steps, and he, once the Black Panther of the Sertões, was now just a shadow of his former self. A man dominated by guilt, pain, and a thirst for revenge against a ghost that he himself created. Zé Baiano's end came as the Backlands usually do, fast, relentless, and harsh. Surrounded by soldiers led by Antonio, he was shot after a long exchange of gunfire, falling among the rocks of a dry stream, his eyes wide open and staring at the sky he never understood. His death was a relief to many and the end of an era, marked by blood and terror. But his story became a warning at every campfire told in the Backlands. Love can be the greatest force and the cruelest of curses. Lampião's cuckold bandit was not defeated by weapons, but by feelings he never knew how to deal with. And so Zé Baiano became a legend, not for what he did as a warrior, but for what he suffered as a man. Because in the Backlands, the line between love and destruction is as thin as the blade of a dagger. Amidst the dry and dusty vastness of the northeastern Sertão, where the sun beats down on the land and the silence is only broken by the singing of birds and the whistling of the wind, Lampião reigned as the feared king of Cangaço. His name inspired fear and respect, echoing from village to village like a ghost armed with courage and ammunition. It was a time of misery and struggle, where the weak succumbed and the strong left their footprints of blood on the ground. Lampião and his gang lived off looting, fighting, and constant escapes from the volantes, always on the edge of life and death. But on that night of the full moon, something different hung in the air. A strange whisper among the branches, a shiver down the spine, and the smell of an ancient fear invaded the souls of the Sertanejos. The news came from an old muleteer. Something was killing the cattle, leaving traces that neither animal nor man could explain. The people trembled. They said he was a werewolf, a creature from the air with flaming eyes and steel claws. Lampião, suspicious of ghost stories, laughed when he heard the reports. But the terror on the faces of the villagers stirred something inside him. It wasn't pity. It was a taste for challenge, for fighting. An old priest spoke of the curse that haunted that land. A man who had made a pact with the darkness and cursed now became a beast on nights with a full moon. Lampião, guided by the spirit of leadership and the promise of even greater fame, decided to set out in search of the creature. With him, his faithful band, men who had faced gunmen and soldiers, but never anything that wasn't human. The objective was clear: eliminate the monster and survive. But deep down, Lampião knew that this time, the enemy was not made of common flesh. He was made of legend, of terror, of everything that not even the bravest bandit dared to face head-on. The journey took them to a dense forest, where the moonlight seemed colder and the sounds of the night more distant. Strange footprints appeared and disappeared in the mud, as if the ground did not want to register their presence. One of the men disappeared. Another was found in pieces as if a rabid animal had torn him apart. Fear began to corrode the group's courage. Ordinary bullets did nothing. They fired, but the monster disappeared into the shadows, mocking the men's bravery. One of the bandits, superstitious, remembered an old tale about silver bullets. Lampião, with his pride wounded and his fury awakened, ordered that the bullets be forged that very night using a silver medallion from a former lover. When the gang finally set up the ambush, the monster appeared. Eyes like embers, a deformed body, teeth like knives. The attack was devastating. The beast jumped with superhuman agility, knocking down and mutilating people. Lampião was thrown against a tree, wounded, covered in blood. Despair was knocking at the door. With the pack nearly decimated and the werewolf getting closer, Lampião had to make a decision: retreat and lose everything, or fight with what was left. Even though he was wounded, he got up, carrying the last silver bullet. The monster came towards him, howling as if hell were pushing him. The two faced each other in the dark, lit only by the moonlight. Lampião aimed, but his hand was shaking. The fear he had never felt before now paralyzed him. At the last second, he remembered his father, his painful childhood, his promise to never back down from anything again. He pulled the trigger. A bang, a deep silence, and the beast's body fell. Little by little, the fur disappeared. The claws retracted, and there lay an old man, the same one who had been seen wandering the village years before. The creature, now defeated, revealed the weight of a soul that carried a cursed burden. Lampião burned his body at sunrise, burying with it the fear he had known. Back in the village, he was received with reverence, but he did not smile. The victory tasted like loss. The lesson was engraved: not every enemy has a familiar face, and not every battle is won with courage and gunpowder. Sometimes it takes faith, resistance, and the recognition that evil can live even in the most forgotten corners of the earth. And so, Lampião returned to the road with a darker, more distant look. He now knew that the Sertão is not made up only of bandits and soldiers, but also of legends that breathe in the darkness. If you liked this chilling story, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the Caragam Sertaneja channel. This really helps our work to continue bringing you legends and stories from our Sertão that chill your spine. Until the next full moon night. In the small village of Pedra Seca, every day seemed the same. The houses were simple, the residents knew each other by name, and the routine dragged on without any major changes. Among the inhabitants was an old woman named Zina, known for her bulging eyes and hoarse voice that whispered things no one wanted to hear. She lived alone, in a cabin on the edge of the forest, and many said she spoke to the dead. Children feared her, adults laughed at her. One day Zina appeared in the village square, interrupting mass with a scream that even caused the priest to spill the communion wine. "Blood will flow. Night will bring the curse of the hanging land," she shouted, pointing to the sky, darkened by heavy clouds. The locals just laughed. "Another crazy thing from the witch," they said. Among them was Diego, a 17-year-old boy, curious, brave, and incredulous. He sneered louder than anyone, challenging the old woman with a sarcastic smile. No one knew it, but that would be the last night of peace the village would know. That same night, a storm unlike any other had ever seen before fell upon Pedra Seca. Lightning flashed across the sky, and the smell of rotten earth filled the air. Animals fled in a stampede, barking echoed in the streets, and doors slammed shut. In the midst of the chaos, Diego heard knocking on his window. It was a pale figure with dark eyes and a mouth sewn shut with thorns. Screaming, he woke his parents, but when he opened the door, there was nothing but mud and silence. The next morning, 3 residents were missing. Zina, when contacted, only whispered, "The warning has been given. The seal has been broken." Frightened but still skeptical, Diego decided to investigate what was happening. The village, increasingly gripped by fear, was divided between fleeing or waiting. Diego knew he had to do something. Seeking answers, he entered the forbidden forest where Zina said evil slept. There, he discovered an ancient tree with twisted branches, and at its feet, symbols of sacrifice and human bones. Ordinary time was over. Now he needed to survive. As the village descended into terror, Diego struggled to understand the origin of the curse. Each night, more people disappeared, and shadow creatures invaded the houses, leaving only screams and bloodstains. Diego returned to Zina, who revealed the truth to him. Centuries ago, this land was the scene of dark rituals where innocents were hanged under the tree of oblivion. The spirit of the executioner, betrayed and cursed, would awaken whenever the tree was touched by hands of new blood. Exactly what Diego had done when he disturbed the old bones. The only chance to reverse the curse was to repeat the ritual with offerings of repentance, fire, blood, and remembrance, but to do so, Diego would have to cross the living forest facing the children of the knot, creatures born from the roots of the cursed tree. On his journey, he lost friends, was wounded by poisoned thorns, and almost gave in to despair. The path was cruel, and each step took a toll on his soul. But he pressed on, driven by guilt and the promise of saving what was left of the village. Deep in the forest, Diego reached the altar of the hanged man, where the executioner's spirit awaited him. A deformed figure with eyes that wept ash, and a voice that spoke within his mind. "You laughed at the warning. Now you will pay the price." The ritual called for a living sacrifice, and Zina was already there, chained, saying she was ready. But Diego could not allow it. The old woman had warned him. He was to blame. So, in an act of redemption, he offered himself. He cut open his palm, lit the sacred fire, and chanted the words Zina had taught him. The forest screamed. The roots caught him, the executioner approached with the black rope, and all seemed lost. But in the final moment, Zina freed herself using ancient words. drove away the spirit and took Diego's place in the sacrifice. With her last breath, she sealed the tree, and it burned in green flames, consuming the monsters, the curse, and the past. The village was free. When Diego returned, he was a changed man. Silently, he respected the memory of those who had passed away and kept a shrine lit for Zina, the old woman who was despised, but saved everyone. Since then, no one laughed at strange warnings anymore, because they learned that true terror begins when you refuse to listen.